Yeah, thank you. Well, to round it off, in the last talk, we want to go back to this sparing, sharing, and caring debate. Now, 2 years ago, we had the session here, and that is still on YouTube if you want, where Peter pretended that he was defending the argument for the sparing hypothesis, and I pretended that I fought with him, and I said it is all about sharing, and we came to the conclusion that in the end, it's all about caring. And it's not that intensifying by itself will save the forest, neither is it that sharing is the answer. It still all depends on whether people actually care about the forest and about the other values that are associated with that. Now, this simple representation of that is sort of in my shirt. You have one part where it's big blocks of land and there is one agriculture here and forest there. And there's another one where you have a little bit of everything everywhere. Now you see here there's the same amount of red, green and blue on the right side of the graph and on the left side of the graph, but it is in a very different spatial configuration. And that's sort of the question, what is which configuration has different type of dynamics, and in terms of our discussion on drivers, what is the relevance of this for our current debate. Now, we're talking here about the drivers, and I got a bit confused about why are we interested in the drivers. And of course the first question is, who is the driver? But then if you think of this driver and the Afolu bus that's going, well, where is the bus heading in the first place, and why is the driver speeding? But then the driver may be speeding because somebody else sets the timetable, and we need to know not who's the driver, but who controls the bus company, and why is the driver doing what the driver is doing. And of course the driver is not by herself in the bus, there is all these passengers in the bus, and the question is, as long as all the passengers are happy with the driver will probably keep doing what they do. And who's paying the fare on the bus? Who's paying the fine? That's before I'd seen Jan stop. And who's paying the tickets, and who is bribing the policeman. So, but in a way we want to understand this system in terms of the drivers, but in a way that's not enough. We want to go from the drivers to the levers. Now the bus has two important levers in the bus. There's an accelerator and there's a brake. Yeah, and the first thing is with our drivers, do we want to speed it up or slow it down? But there are other levers within that bus. There is a gear shift. And of course there is the driver that the bus runs out of fuel. But we can also talk about changing the contractor company, or changing the timetable and the roadmap. And maybe ultimately we need less passengers and higher fines. So just to get us a bit more confused about what do we mean and why are we so interested in drivers. Well, we're interested in drivers because we think that will give us leverage points to change the behavior and to change the timetable of deforestation, of emissions, but we need all these multiple aspects coming together. Now there is a very interesting video clip on The Guardian of a journalist who was traveling in Indonesia and saw the huge rapid conversion of the peatland forest out there, and then interviews the external affairs director of Asia, one of the biggest pulp and paper companies of the world. And the guy said, well, we've been planting 100 million trees over the last couple of years. So the journalist asked, and how many hectares have you deforested? Sorry, can you repeat the question? So you've planted all these trees, and how much have you deforested? Sorry, can you? No. Anyway, ultimately, no, we are not deforesting. This is sustainable forest management. And they are true. Within the Indonesian forest definition, converting a natural forest and replacing it by a monoculture plantation of a fast-growing tree is not deforestation, it is just shift, and their plantation is the first to get certified as sustainable forest management, and replacing that diverse peat forest by a monoculture plantation is sustainable forest management. It's not the problem, it's the solution. Sonja referred to this is our data of the different types of forest in Indonesia from 1990 till 2010, and if you would take a strict conservation perspective and you define natural forest as untouched natural forest, and you see we're still going down very rapidly. If you include the various classes of logged and logged over forest, if you include the plantations, and if you include the agroforest, if you want to apply a Kyoto Protocol forest definition, then actually we are already increasing in our total forest area. And if you express it as deforestation rates, and this is the value that Sonja quoted. For a strict forest definition, Indonesia is still deforesting between 3 and 5% per year. For a very relaxed forest definition, we are already in negative mode. We are already degrading forest. So that's why Sonja said, well, deforestation rate in itself is not a meaningful parameter until or unless we specify what is inside, what is outside forest definitions, and we need to make that very clear. It's also very clear to us that there is not a driver of deforestation. Every type of forest and change in tree cover has its own type of drivers and its own type of factors associated with it, and we need to go richer than that. Yeah? So for example, if we would have a legend with 6 types of land cover from 2 types of forest and an agroforest and 2 types of plantation and an open field agriculture, we would have 6 by 6 is 36 cells of conversion for every time step. Well, 6 of them would be no change. Yeah, and 15 of them would mean a shift to a land cover with lower carbon stock, and 15 would imply a shift to a land cover with a higher carbon stock. If you put that into forest, non-forest, you get different colors, and one part becomes degradation, another part becomes deforestation, another becomes afforestation, this and that. With any possible interpretation of what we mean by forest, we get all possible answers of that. So from the research side, we think we need to simply describe the tree cover changes and leave what you want to call forest or non-forest to the pure political institutional side, because that's what it is. So within the research that we do, we use that tree cover transition graph as our overall frame, and of course we see this as a temporal statement about temporal change, spatial change. An important statement is about institution. Where do we move from a forest institutional frame to an agrarian one? What is the link in the landscape? Does it matter what happens on the right hand side? Does it happen what goes on left? And how do we interpret this? Now, this is an example from Kenya, where I would say, well, on the left hand side we see a national park in the Aberdares, and on the right hand side you see an agriculture park. You would see this as a strong boundary, and this is a sparing story. At the same time, in that agricultural space there actually is a lot of tree and tree cover coming within that agricultural space as well. Examples are just a Google Earth travel around the world. You see, of course, very different spatial patterns. You see places we have a dark forest there with gradual eating into it from a smallholder part. You see landscapes where you have the riparian, all the riparian gallery forest remains, and all the big spaces in between get opened up. And we have intermediate spaces where we have the riparian forest staying, and some actual green spaces around villages. Now there's a rather famous area in Guinea, in the Kisidougou area, where the pattern of cover looks like this. This is in the transition zone of rainforest to savanna. Yeah, and here you really see that all the villages are in a forest, surrounded by forest. There are some open patches within, but the villages are associated with the forest, and the in-between is pretty open land, is the savanna land. And there's a famous book in '95 about misreading the African landscape, or false forest history, and how social analysis as well as the ecologists completely missed the point by misinterpreting that landscape. In that book there's sorry for the quality here, but the aerial photograph of 1950 shows indeed some of these forest patches with empty space between. 1990 aerial photographs in the book shows a bit more forest in between. One is the Google Earth thing from last night, and it shows that actually within that landscape we've seen a lot more tree cover between those forested patches of the village now than there was before. Yet most of the description and most of the people coming there talk this is a deforestation story, and the Fairhead leech story says it is actually not. Yeah, so that leads us to a 3-step approach that we, from the research side, think we need to apply. The first is we have indeed to be very careful in what is changing in terms of tree cover, and what legend is appropriate to describe that, and what do local people mean by forest, what does a policy frame mean by forest, and what's going on, and between the different agents, what is their role. The second is try to interpret that pattern of change with Okay, there's a group of factors that's in the economic domain and is about the profitability and all the factors that influence profitability. There's an important chunk that is about the rights and about the governance and the types of things Jan was talking about. Yeah, so we try to understand what is actually driving the process as it is. But then the important step is we want to switch from drivers to levers. Yeah, so if the driver is in the economic domain indeed, then a consumer boycott of certain products might help. If it is in road infrastructure, then a shift of the banks in their investment policy might work. If it is about a lack of things going wrong within the governance scale, so we need this much more carefully constructed story of what actually are the leverage points on the different drivers to make it work. And I think an important point is there is not a single set of levers, but different stakeholders have control over different types of levers, and we won't get towards influencing the process until these different leverage points have a common agenda. Yeah, so we see the landscape on one hand as a construct of physical geography, social geography, but we see it primarily as the institutional space where all these different instruments and levers should come together, and only if they really synergize will we get the effects that we want to get out of it. So our conclusions, all the analysis of drivers in the past has said that drivers differ from one place to another. They are different in Latin America than they are from Africa and Asia. They also differ by decade. What were the drivers in the 1990s no longer are the drivers in the 2000s. So then you ask yourself, well, why should we care about drivers if we can't predict the future drivers from the current ones? And I think there's a good deal of truth in that. And the policy responses, of course, we can still analyze them in the carrots, sticks and sermons part, and Jan's example again shows that the sticks probably are at least as relevant as the carrots, but the sticks themselves contain carrots and link back with future benefit flows on it. And ultimately within this, it is the sermons and the caring part that is an essential part of changing it. These village forests in Africa were there because they were important to the people in their own right, and unless we create and stimulate the arguments why forests are important for people in their own landscape, we won't get there by paying whatever amount of money through a red frame. It is getting it into the caring and the local relevance domain that we need to be. Thank you.